The early internet in the 1990s was like a digital Wild West. Vast, untamed, and full of hidden corners. Websites were popping up every day, but there was no proper system to organize them. The World Wide Web had exploded into a chaotic sprawl of pages filled with blinking GIFs, Comic Sans text, and loud background music. You couldn't just type a question and expect a useful answer. You had to hunt. And click. And scroll. Most search engines at the time were dumb. They simply looked for exact keywords and returned results that were often irrelevant or spammy. AltaVista, Lycos, Excite, WebCrawler, Hotbot, and Ask Jeeves, these were the giants before Google. And yet, none of them truly understood what you were looking for. They didn't rank pages based on trust, usefulness, or popularity. They just matched strings of text. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. And someone dumped 10 more haystacks on top of you. Imagine searching for best camera in 1996. What would you get? A bunch of websites stuffed with the word camera repeated 100 times to trick the system. Broken links. A personal blog where someone mentioned buying a camera once. A site that had nothing to do with cameras, but had best and camera mentioned in 2 separate footnotes. These results weren't just unhelpful, they were often misleading. That's because early search engines didn't measure quality. They had no way to understand which page people trusted or why a link should matter. This was the problem the entire internet faced. And no one seemed to be solving it properly, until 2 students at Stanford came along. In the quiet, code-filled halls of Stanford University, the seeds of something revolutionary were being planted. Larry Page, a quiet yet intellectually intense PhD student, was fascinated by the structure of the internet. He saw it not just as a group of pages, but as a network of relationships. Pages linked to other pages. Some links were random. But others carried weight, a kind of digital vote of trust. What if a link from one website to another could be treated like a recommendation? What if the structure of the web itself could help determine which information mattered? This was more than just keyword matching. This was thinking like a human. At the time, no one thought in terms of ranking pages by importance. Everyone focused on content alone. But Larry Page started a research project called Backrub. A name that sounds awkward now, but at the time made perfect sense. It was based on analyzing backlinks, or the links pointing back to a page. He teamed up with another student, Sergey Brin, a brilliant mathematician with a bold, skeptical attitude and a love for data. Together, they began working on what would become the foundation of Google. The internet needed a brain. A way to make sense of billions of web pages. Something that didn't just match words, but understood relationships, relevance, and trust. They didn't want to build just another search engine. They wanted to build the best one. But first, they had to survive dorm life, convince professors, find money, and convince the world that search could be smarter. This is where it all began. Not in a flashy office. Not in Silicon Valley meetings. But in frustration, in curiosity, and in a messy digital jungle that needed order. Stanford University. Mid-1995. In a quiet academic hallway filled with terminals, coffee cups, and the constant hum of dial-up modems. 2 young PhD students were about to cross paths. Larry Page, a quiet, intense thinker from Michigan. And Sergey Brin, a fiery, confident brain from Maryland by way of Moscow. Neither of them knew it yet, but their meeting would lead to the founding of one of the most powerful companies in human history. Ari was the son of 2 computer science professors. His father, Carl Page, was a pioneer in artificial intelligence. From an early age, Larry was fascinated with technology, especially how machines could be used to organize the world. He wasn't loud. He didn't like small talk. But he had an obsession with solving hard problems. Especially ones related to information systems. At Stanford, he was diving into a massive project. Understanding how the World Wide Web was connected. How pages linked to each other, how clusters formed, how structure could reveal meaning. This was the seed of something revolutionary. But Larry didn't know how big it would grow. Sergey Brin was different. A Soviet-born immigrant who had arrived in the U.S. At age 6, Sergey was bold, curious, skeptical of everything, and absolutely in love with mathematics. He loved playing with data, crunching formulas, and debating ideas with anyone who would listen. While Larry stayed quiet, Sergey questioned everything. He once said, "I'd rather be in an argument than in agreement." At Stanford, he was working in data mining and mathematical modeling. And though he wasn't thinking about changing the internet just yet, he was open to exploring anything that challenged convention. Larry had just arrived at Stanford. Sergey was already a second-year student. As part of a student orientation tour, Sergey was randomly assigned to show Larry around the campus. The two didn't click. They argued. A lot. They clashed on academic opinions, disagreed about theories, and couldn't even agree on which department was stronger. Their personalities were too different. Larry was quiet and internal, Sergey was outgoing and assertive. But something strange happened. They kept debating. They kept bumping into each other in computer science discussions, research labs, and grad student seminars. And the more they debated, the more intrigued they became by each other's ideas. In time, they found a shared obsession: the architecture of the web. Larry was developing his idea for a search engine that didn't just count keywords, but actually measured how many other pages linked to a given page. He believed this could reveal which pages were more important, more authoritative, and more relevant. Sergey was hooked. Together, they began building a prototype system in their dorm room. Using old computers, cobbled together hardware, and a growing pile of data from Stanford's web servers. They called it Backrub. Backrub was unlike anything else. Instead of scanning for exact word matches, it ranked pages based on the number and quality of links pointing to them. The basic idea was that the more a page is linked to by other pages, the more trustworthy and relevant it might be, Larry explained in a later interview. They built it in C++, hosted it on Stanford servers, and tested it relentlessly. And slowly, they realized, they weren't just building a class project. They were building something the world desperately needed. Larry and Sergey didn't stop arguing. In fact, it became their secret superpower. Larry would focus on the long-term vision, the clean architecture, the purpose. Sergey would poke holes in the logic, test the math, demand evidence. Their arguments pushed the project forward. And the more they pushed, the more they realized. The web was about to explode. And no one had yet figured out how to find anything. Working out of their dorm rooms, they hacked together a data center using cheap computers, custom-built racks made of Lego bricks, and wires running through walls. They borrowed server time, begged friends to help crawl pages, and often broke Stanford's bandwidth limits. Their professors were impressed, but unsure what to make of it. This wasn't quite a paper. It wasn't quite a company. It was something different. And Larry and Sergey were becoming obsessed. By 1997, Backrub was getting so much traffic from Stanford users that it started crashing systems. The school's network administrator had to ask them to shut it down. They were thrilled. Because this meant people were using it. It meant it worked. Now the question was, should they publish a paper? Or start a company? Their answer would define the next chapter. Not only of their lives, but of the internet itself. By early 1996, the Stanford dorm room shared by Larry Page and Sergey Brin didn't look like a place where world-changing innovation was happening. Old computer parts were scattered across the floor. Monitors blinked constantly. Cables ran along walls like vines. Notes, formulas, and printed graphs were stuck to the windows. The hum of machines never stopped. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. This is where they were building their prototype search engine, Backrub. The name wasn't meant to be catchy. It was literal. Backrub referred to backlinks, links from one web page to another. Larry and Sergey believed backlinks were the key to understanding how important a web page really was. Their logic was simple and brilliant. If many important pages link to one page, that page is probably also important. They weren't counting words. They were measuring trust. This idea, called PageRank, became the heart of the algorithm. We realized that the web was like a citation system. Pages referenced each other. We just had to rank them the way academic papers are ranked, Larry would later say. PageRank was based on a recursive idea. A page's rank depended on the ranks of the pages that linked to it. It was like mathematical word of mouth. If respected websites linked to a page, it gained credibility, just like academic papers gained status by being cited. Larry wrote the core algorithm. Sergey helped refine it using matrix theory and linear algebra. Together, they coded it in C++ and began crawling the Stanford domain. The results were stunning. Their system returned better, more relevant search results than any engine available at the time. Backrub didn't just find information. It found the best information. They had no office. No investors. No team. But they had passion, and a lot of recycled parts. They gathered old computers from around campus. Wired them together into a makeshift server rack, and ran the entire system from a dormitory closet. They even used Lego bricks to mount the hardware. It wasn't glamorous. But it was genius. We didn't have money, but we had ideas. And we had each other to challenge those ideas every single day, Sergey later said. By 1997, Backrub was crawling over 75 million pages and consuming huge amounts of Stanford's bandwidth. More and more students began using it, preferring it over other search engines like AltaVista or Lycos. The project had outgrown side project status. Larry and Sergey published a research paper titled The Anatomy of a Large-Scale Hypertextual Web Search Engine. It caught the attention of academics and tech circles. But despite the buzz, major tech companies didn't get it. Yahoo, Excite, and even AltaVista ignored the pair when they tried to license the technology. They thought search wasn't a business, Sergey said with a laugh years later. By the end of 1997, Larry and Sergey realized they needed a new name. Backrub didn't sound right for a product going public. They brainstormed late into the night. They wanted something that captured the scale of what they were building. Something vast. Something mathematical. They landed on the word Google, the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. It symbolized their mission, to organize an unfathomable amount of information. But when they checked domain availability, they made a typo, google.com. It was available. They took it. Thus, in late 1997, Google was born. The name was a happy accident. The impact would be anything but. The system worked. People loved it. But they were broke. To move forward, they needed servers, space, and funding. So they pitched to professors, tech investors, and even friends of friends. And then, came a miracle. One morning in 1998, during a quick demo at Stanford, tech entrepreneur Andy Bechtolsheim saw Backrub in action. He was stunned. Without waiting for a full pitch, he wrote them a check for $100,000. Made out to Google Incorporated. There was only one problem. Google Incorporated didn't exist yet. Larry and Sergey scrambled to register the company officially. They used Bechtolsheim's check to set up a bank account. And then, the floodgates opened. More funding followed, from Jeff Bezos, Amazon founder, Stanford professors, and angel investors. They raised about $1 million. They were no longer students. They were startup founders. They moved out of the dorms, into a garage rented from Susan Wojcicki, a Stanford friend who needed rent money. There, with a few computers, a dog named Yashka, and a tiny team, Google Incorporated officially began. A quiet suburban house with a two-car garage. Nothing about it screamed, future of the internet. No neon logo. No glass offices. Just a small, rented space owned by a young Stanford alum named Susan Wojcicki, who would, years later, become CEO of YouTube, which Google would acquire in 2006. But in 1998, she was simply a homeowner looking to make rent. And two grad students were looking for a place to build a company. Larry Page and Sergey Brin took it. Not because they wanted to create a myth. Because it was cheap, nearby, and it gave them room to expand, physically and mentally. When Andy Bechtolsheim wrote a spontaneous $100,000 check to Google Inc. After a quick morning demo at Stanford, he set off a chain reaction. There was no Google Incorporated yet, just two researchers with a prototype. The check sat undeposited. To cash it, they had to incorporate. To incorporate, they needed an address, some structure, and, most importantly, a place to scale. The garage solved that. The myth begins here. The truth is, they wouldn't stay long. This wasn't a designer office. It was bare, messy, improvisational. Old desks. Folding chairs. Whiteboards covered with arrows, ranking diagrams, and relevance scores. The early Google servers, assembled from cheap parts and crammed into makeshift racks, buzzed constantly. The team wrote code, crawled the web, and tried to not break Stanford's bandwidth, again. They weren't optimizing for aesthetics, they were optimizing for speed. Speed of search. Speed of iteration. Speed of decision-making. And yes, the dog, Yashka, a friendly Leon burger owned by their first employee Craig Silverstein, was already roaming around. Yashka would become Google's unofficial first mascot. Before the world knew the names Marissa Mayer or Omid Kordestani. There was Craig Silverstein, the first person Larry and Sergey trusted enough to bring in full-time. Craig was a fellow Stanford PhD student, brilliant, methodical, and unusually calm amid chaos. His job, write the code that made Google scale. If Larry and Sergey held the vision, Craig built the bridge that took them there. He could translate Larry's abstract, audacious ideas into functioning systems. He could argue algorithmic details with Sergey and still ship code overnight. He was the kind of engineer a company like Google needed at the very start. There was no HR doctrine, no framed values, no company handbook. But a culture was already forming, organically, almost accidentally. Minimal hierarchy. Ideas won. Titles didn't matter, there weren't many anyway. Move fast, fix faster. If something broke, they didn't write a memo, they rewrote the code. Data decides. Opinions were fine. Experiments were better. Efficiency over ego. The web was exploding, they didn't have time for politics. These ideas would later formalize into things we all associate with Google. A/B testing, engineering-first leadership, obsession with speed, and that relentless focus on relevance over noise. But in the garage, it was just survival. The garage is more than a place, it's a symbol. Hewlett-Packard, 1939, the original Silicon Valley garage story. Apple, 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak assembling machines in a Los Altos garage. Google, 1998, the next generation in the same mythic lineage. But here's the truth behind the myth. Google didn't invent its core tech in that garage. Backrub, the earliest version of Google, was born on Stanford's campus. PageRank was conceived during late-night academic debates. The technical foundation existed before the garage. The garage was not the birthplace, it was the launch pad. The garage matters because it marks the moment the project became a company. The point at which professors became advisors, classmates became employees, and the search prototype became Google.com for the world. They didn't stay long. Within months, the team had outgrown the garage and moved into their first proper office at 165 University Avenue. Palo Alto, a startup incubator building that would later host many other Silicon Valley companies. Why the quick move? Traffic exploded. More users meant more servers, more bandwidth, more operational complexity. Investors were coming in. Jeff Bezos, Amazon's founder, Ram Shriram, David Sheraton, and others were backing them. They needed a bigger team. Engineers, ops people, systems admins, and eventually a sales org. The garage was a marker, a short chapter in a very big book. Susan didn't just rent them a space, she gave them time. Time to set up, time to focus, time to grow without the pressure of high overhead. She later joined Google as employee number 16 and went on to lead AdSense, a product that would make Google billions, before becoming CEO of YouTube after Google acquired it. A small, practical decision, renting out a garage, became a bridge to global influence. Even as Google moved out, several things stuck. The algorithm is king, everything else exists to serve the quality of results. Build cheap, scale smart, commodity hardware, custom software. Make it fast first. Make it beautiful later. Question everything. Larry and Sergey never stopped debating, questioning, or optimizing. Speed equals user love, faster pages, faster answers. Users notice. Users return. Engineers at the center, decisions started and ended with data and engineering truth, not management politics. These weren't slogans, they were survival tactics. They later crystallized into Google's DNA. Myth, Google was built in a garage. Truth, Google was scaled and incorporated out of a garage. The ideas, algorithms, and early code came from Stanford's labs and dorms. The garage period was short, but crucial. It turned a project into a company, a demo into a product, and two academics into founders. But myths matter, because they carry meaning. The garage says, we started with nothing but an idea and ended up organizing the world's information. And that, in essence, is true. Leaving the garage, Google would soon discover a bigger truth. Search wasn't just useful, it was profitable. But Larry and Sergey were idealists. They didn't want ugly ads or spammy banners. They wanted useful ads, ads that helped users and funded their mission. That tension, between idealism and business, would define the next chapter. The world was about to meet AdWords, AdSense. And the monetization engine that would transform Google from a brilliant search tool into one of the most powerful companies in history. But before that came the structuring of the company. The recruitment of a CEO, and the battle against the early internet giants. In 1998, the duo wasn't even thinking of building a company. In fact, they tried to sell their PageRank technology to established search engines like Yahoo, Excite, and AltaVista. The price? A modest $1 million. Every single one of them passed. Search is not that important, one exec said. Users just want a portal. Not more search results. That rejection turned out to be one of the worst business decisions in tech history. Enter Andy Bechtolsheim, co-founder of Sun Microsystems. Larry and Sergey demoed their project to him in a quick outdoor meeting. After a few minutes, Andy reportedly said, "I don't need to see anything else. I'll write you a check right now." On September 4, 1998, Google Inc. was officially born. Larry and Sergey opened a business bank account. Deposited Andy's check, and suddenly, the clock was ticking. They used the money to buy servers, hire a few early engineers, and rent a garage space, yes, that garage, at the home of Susan Wojcicki in Menlo Park. The location became a symbol of humble startup beginnings. But behind the scenes, there were real challenges brewing. Larry and Sergey were visionaries, but they weren't businessmen, not yet. They had radical ideas. They didn't want banner ads cluttering their pages like Yahoo. They insisted the algorithm must remain pure. Advertising should be useful, not disruptive. That idealism would soon collide with the demands of growth. Early employees described the tension. It felt like we were building a Ferrari with a Prius budget. Despite the brilliant technology, investors were skeptical. Some thought Larry and Sergey were too stubborn. Too academic. Not practical enough. Others, however, saw gold. After Bechtelsheim's leap of faith, others followed. Friends of friends. Tech insiders. A small group of angel investors began to rally around the young company. By the end of 1998, they had raised nearly $1 million in total. This wasn't just luck, it was momentum. The early believers included Jeff Bezos, yes, Amazon's founder, Ram Shriram, and others who understood the internet was on the verge of something big. But even as money came in, doubts remained. Was search really worth betting on? Could Larry and Sergey grow with the company? Or would they need to step aside like so many other founders before them? The tension between idealism and reality, between dream and execution, was starting to show.